As a man listened to the relentless scratching at his door, he finally gave in and opened it, only to have his world shift in an instant. A German shepherd stood there, shivering, but it wasn't just her presence that froze him. Clutched gently in her mouth was not food, not a toy, but a tiny, unmoving life. The wind howled like a wounded beast, battering the walls of Ethan's cabin as snow swirled violently outside. He sat hunched over his desk, staring blankly at an unfinished photograph on his laptop screen, a reminder of the life he'd lost and the isolation he now embraced. The storm seemed alive, relentless, pressing against every crack in the wooden structure. Ethan wrapped himself tighter in his blanket, trying to drown out the chaos beyond the frosted windows. But then came a sound that broke through the blizzard's roar, a faint, desperate whine that made his chest tighten. Ethan froze, unsure if the noise was real or just another trick of the storm. It came again, soft but insistent, carrying a note of urgency. Rising slowly, he moved toward the window, peering into the swirling white void. At first, all he saw was darkness, but then a shadow emerged from the chaos. A German shepherd stood there, her fur matted with ice, shivering uncontrollably. Her eyes locked onto his, wide and pleading, as though begging him to act. Something about her presence tugged at something deep inside him. Ethan hesitated, gripping the edge of the curtain tightly. He had sworn off attachments after losing everything years ago. Caring for anyone or anything felt too risky. Yet, the dog didn't leave. Instead, she glanced back toward the woods, her movements frantic, almost protective. What was she guarding? Or running from? Against his better judgment, curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, moving cautiously toward the door, unsure of what awaited him. As Ethan opened the door, cold air rushed in, biting at his skin. The sight of the trembling dog stirred memories he'd tried so hard to bury, the faces of those he'd loved and lost, their laughter replaced by silence. For a moment he felt paralyzed by grief, but this wasn't about him anymore. Whatever the dog needed, it mattered more than his fear. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The German shepherd's frantic pawing grew louder, each scrape against the wooden door echoing through the cabin like a plea for help. Her cries pierced the storm's howl, raw and desperate, as if she knew this was her last chance. Ethan stood frozen, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The cold seeped through the cracks in the walls, but it wasn't just the weather that chilled him. It was the weight of what lay beyond the door. He could feel her urgency pressing against him, impossible to ignore any longer. Finally, Ethan turned the handle and pulled the door open. The dog stumbled inside, her body trembling from the cold. But it wasn't until she looked up at him with pleading eyes that he saw it. A tiny, motionless puppy clutched gently in her mouth. Her gaze shifted between Ethan and the pup, filled with both desperation and an unspoken trust. It was clear she had carried this fragile life through unimaginable conditions, risking everything to keep it safe. Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. The sight of them stirred something deep within him. As Ethan knelt beside the dog, memories flooded back. Weeks earlier, during one of his solitary hikes, he'd spotted her. She had been skittish then, ribs visible beneath matted fur, eyes darting nervously as though expecting harm. Someone had abandoned her, leaving her to fend for herself in the wilderness. Now here she was again, not only surviving, but fiercely protecting her pup. Her resilience struck a chord in Ethan, reminding him of his own struggles after losing his family. They were more alike than he cared to admit. Ethan hesitated, torn between compassion and self-preservation. Letting these animals into his home meant opening himself up to emotions he'd worked so hard to bury. What if they became attached? What if he failed them just as he felt he'd failed those he loved before? But as he watched the mother dog curl protectively around her pup, his heart wavered. Could he really turn away when they needed him most? The frail puppy's labored breathing brought another wave of memories crashing down. The image of his wife and daughter, their laughter silenced too soon. He remembered holding on to hope during those dark days, clinging to anything that promised survival. This tiny creature, barely alive, mirrored the fragility of life he once fought so hard to preserve. His chest tightened, guilt mingling with a newfound resolve. Maybe helping them would be his way of honoring the love he'd lost. With a heavy sigh, Ethan scooped the unconscious puppy into his arms and ushered the exhausted dog further inside. "You're safe now," he murmured, though the words felt foreign on his lips. As the storm raged outside, the warmth of his cabin enveloped them, marking the beginning of a journey none of them could have foreseen. Ethan moved cautiously around the cabin, his hands trembling as he prepared warm milk for the frail puppy and a makeshift meal for the exhausted mother dog. He named her Luna, a name that seemed to fit her quiet resilience. As he placed the bowls on the floor, Luna hesitated, her eyes wary but desperate. She nudged Max closer to the food before taking tentative bites herself. Ethan watched silently, unsure if she would ever fully trust him, or if he could let himself care too deeply. Over the next few days, small signs of trust began to emerge. One evening, as Ethan sat by the fire, Luna approached slowly, her tail low but steady. She sniffed his hand, then rested her head briefly on his knee before retreating. It was fleeting, but it meant something. A crack in the wall she'd built to protect herself and Max. Ethan felt a flicker of hope, realizing this fragile connection might grow into something stronger with time. The bond deepened through tiny, meaningful gestures. When Max whimpered in his sleep, Luna nudged Ethan's leg, as though asking for help. Another time, when Ethan reached out to stroke her fur, she didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes softening. These moments became anchors for both of them, reminders that they weren't alone anymore. Each shared glance, each unspoken understanding, wove their lives together more tightly. But life wasn't easy. Ethan's savings dwindled quickly as vet bills piled up. Feeding 2 growing dogs stretched his resources thin, and guilt gnawed at him every time he opened an empty pantry. Yet, even in moments of doubt, he couldn't bring himself to abandon them. Their presence had begun to fill the void in his heart, making the sacrifices feel worth it, even when the weight threatened to crush him. Luna's past lingered like a shadow over their newfound peace. At the sound of a distant car engine, she froze, her body rigid with fear. Thunderstorm sent her cowering under the table. Max clutched protectively against her chest. Watching her struggle broke Ethan's heart, reminding him of his own scars. They were alike in so many ways, both carrying burdens too heavy to bear alone, yet finding solace in each other's company. Caring for Luna and Max taught Ethan patience he didn't know he possessed. He learned to wait for Luna to come to him, never forcing her trust. He spoke softly, moved slowly, and gave her space when she needed it. In return, she rewarded him with glimpses of her true self, a loyal, loving soul who simply needed someone to believe in her again. One night, Ethan woke to the sharp bark of Luna at the window. His heart raced as he followed her gaze, spotting a shadowy figure lurking near the edge of the woods. The air grew heavy with unease, and Ethan's instincts screamed danger. Luna stood between him and the window, her hackles raised, her growl low and warning. For the first time, Ethan realized how much she was willing to risk for him, and how much he now relied on her courage. In that tense moment, Ethan saw Luna not just as a frightened stray, but as a protector, fiercely guarding what mattered most to her. Her loyalty struck him deeply, solidifying the bond they'd been building. As the figure disappeared into the darkness, Ethan knelt beside Luna, placing a hand on her trembling shoulder. "We're in this together," he whispered, knowing without a doubt that she understood. The shadowy figure stepped out of the darkness, his silhouette sharp against the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. Ethan's stomach tightened as recognition dawned. This was the man from Luna's past, the one who had abandoned and abused her. His voice cut through the night like a blade. "I've come for what's mine," he growled, his eyes locking onto Luna and Max. Ethan instinctively moved to block their view, his heart pounding with dread. "You don't own them," Ethan shot back, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. The man sneered, stepping closer. "She belongs to me. That pup too. Hand them over, or things will get ugly." Ethan felt a surge of anger mixed with protectiveness. He glanced at Luna, who stood rigid, shielding Max behind her. There was no way he'd let this monster take them back, not after everything they'd been through together. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, memories of his own failures flashing in his mind. But then he looked at Luna and Max, the fragile trust they'd built, the family they'd become, and knew he couldn't falter now. "You're not taking them," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. It wasn't just about protecting them anymore. It was about standing up for something greater than himself. They mattered, and so did the bond they shared. Knowing the situation was escalating, Ethan reached out to a local animal rescue group he'd contacted earlier. Together, they devised a plan to set up hidden cameras around the cabin, capturing evidence of the man's threats. Every movement felt deliberate, every decision critical. As Ethan worked, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but also the strength that came from knowing Luna and Max depended on him. The abusive owner returned the next night, his patience wearing thin. He pounded on the door, shouting threats that echoed through the quiet woods. Inside, Ethan's hands trembled as he clutched the phone, ready to call the authorities. Luna growled low, her body tense, while Max whimpered softly. The air was thick with fear and anticipation. One wrong move and everything could unravel. Ethan swallowed hard, praying his plan would hold. When the man finally forced his way inside, Luna didn't hesitate. With a fierce bark, she lunged at him, teeth bared, positioning herself between him and Ethan. Her bravery stunned even Ethan, who had never seen such raw determination in her before. She wasn't just defending Max, she was defending him. At that moment, Ethan realized how deeply their bond had grown. Tears pricked his eyes as he fumbled for the phone, dialing emergency services. Time seemed to slow as Ethan whispered urgently into the phone, describing the intruder's actions while keeping an eye on the chaos unfolding before him. Luna's distraction gave him precious seconds, but the man was relentless, shoving her aside with brutal force. Ethan's heart raced as he heard sirens in the distance. "Hold on, girl," he murmured, gripping the counter for support. Just a little longer and help would arrive. The sound of approaching vehicles shattered the tension. Red and blue lights flooded the clearing as officers surrounded the cabin. The abusive owner froze, caught off guard by the sudden arrival. Thanks to the camera footage and Luna's courageous intervention, there was undeniable proof of his cruelty. As he was led away in handcuffs, Ethan sank to his knees, pulling Luna and Max close. They were safe, and together they had faced the storm and won. The authorities took the abusive owner away, his threats silenced by the weight of evidence against him. Ethan watched from the doorway as the squad car disappeared down the winding road, its red lights fading into the distance. Luna stood beside him, her body relaxed for the first time in days. Max wagged his tail, sensing the shift in the air. For the first time in months, they were truly safe. Ethan knelt to stroke Luna's head. "It's over," he whispered. "You're home now." A few weeks later, Ethan officially adopted Luna and Max, signing the papers with a sense of finality that brought tears to his eyes. They weren't just pets. They were family. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow, filled with the sounds of playful barks and wagging tails. Ethan realized how empty it had been before their arrival. With Luna curled at his feet and Max dozing on his lap, he felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: belonging. Caring for Luna and Max reignited parts of Ethan he thought were lost forever. Their boundless energy reminded him of his daughter's laughter. Their loyalty mirrored the love he once shared with his wife. He found himself smiling more often, laughing even, as Max chased leaves in the yard or Luna nudged him playfully during quiet moments. In their presence, Ethan rediscovered joy. Not just fleeting happiness, but a deep, abiding contentment. Luna, too, began to heal. The scars of her past softened as trust replaced fear. She no longer flinched at loud noises or cowered under the table during storms. Instead, she bounded through the woods with Max, her tail high and her spirit unbroken. Watching her transformation, Ethan saw reflections of his own journey. How far they'd both come since that fateful night. Together they had faced their demons and emerged stronger. Inspired by Luna and Max's resilience, Ethan decided to give back. He began volunteering at a local animal shelter, helping neglected dogs find homes. Each wagging tail and hopeful gaze reminded him of his own second chance. It wasn't easy work, but it was meaningful, a way to honor the bond he shared with Luna and Max. As he walked the kennels, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing he could make a difference. On a bright spring morning, Ethan led Luna and Max along the same trail where he'd first encountered Luna months ago. The snow had melted, revealing lush greenery and vibrant wildflowers. Luna trotted ahead, her nose twitching with curiosity, while Max stumbled after her, full of puppy energy. Ethan paused, taking in the scene. This path, once a symbol of struggle and uncertainty, now represented renewal and connection. They had come so far, together. As Ethan watched Luna and Max race through the clearing, their joy infectious, he felt a warmth spread through his chest. For years, he'd carried the weight of loss, believing he'd never be whole again. But here, surrounded by their love, he realized he already was. Smiling softly, he whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, Ethan knew he wasn't alone anymore. Together, they had healed each other. As Ethan sat on the porch watching Luna and Max play in the golden afternoon light, he reflected on how their unconditional love had mended parts of him he thought were broken forever. Their trust in him, despite his flaws and fears, had taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength. For the first time in years, he felt whole, grateful for the bond they shared. Through Luna and Max, Ethan found redemption. Not just from his grief, but from the walls he'd built around his heart. They showed him that second chances weren't just possible, they were transformative. In opening himself to them, he rediscovered the beauty of connection, realizing that healing often begins with letting others in. Ethan marveled at how an unexpected encounter during a storm had changed everything. He learned that sometimes healing doesn't come from within, it comes from relationships that challenge us to grow. Luna and Max had entered his life unbidden, yet they became his greatest teachers, showing him resilience, hope, and the courage to start anew. Both Ethan and Luna had carried scars into their shared journey. He from loss, she from abuse. But together they found strength. Their mutual care and compassion transformed not only their lives, but also the way they saw themselves. They proved that even the deepest wounds could heal when met with love and understanding. The story ends with a quiet promise: everyone deserves a second chance at love and happiness, whether human or animal. As Ethan watched Luna and Max chase each other through the field, he smiled, knowing their bond was proof that hope always finds a way.